Hi everyone, thanks for joining me today. If you've come across this video, you're probably either a PA student or a pre-PA looking for some really good study tips for PA school. I'm going to be doing a complete deep dive going through all the tiny little details of what I did to succeed in PA school. So a little bit about me, my name is Phoebe. I recently graduated PA school. I graduated summa cum laude. I was the recipient of multiple awards, including the National PA Student of the Year Award, which I was very honored to receive. Throughout my PA school career, I've earned multiple scholarships, was inducted into the Pi Alpha Honor Society, and was also balancing running my small business and several leadership positions at the same time. So I get questions all the time, like how did you do it? How did you have time for it all? How did you still prioritize PA school on top of all those extra things you were doing? And this is exactly how I did it. I'm going to share it with you and hopefully it'll help you out as well. So just a little bit of an overview. I am going to go over kind of my philosophy regarding how to study for PA school first. We've all heard the saying, it's like drinking out of a fire hydrant. There's just so much information constantly being thrown at you that it can feel overwhelming really, really quickly if you don't know what you're doing. So hopefully my strategies will kind of make that period feel very, very short. And then, so I'm gonna go over the philosophies that I've had, and then I'm gonna go talk about my specific study strategies for didactic year of PA school. And then I'm gonna talk about the ones that I had during clinical year, because those are kind of two slightly different studying styles. There's a lot of overlap with what I did, but a lot of differences, and I'll point those out as well. And then last but not least, I'll go over just some tips overall for PA school in general to keep in mind. And this honestly made things, I don't want to say easy, but definitely very as stress-free as possible. And I think if like you're gonna have to go through PA school one way or another, why not do it the easier way and start early? So without further ado, let's jump into it. Okay, so I have 4 kind of little rules or philosophies regarding how I approached studying PA school. The first one being to do everything early, and I'll definitely get into this a little bit more, but do everything early and front load everything. Number 2 was everything that I did studying wise, learning wise, was designed to work with how I naturally wanted to learn and not against it. And that's very important because you don't want to be fighting your brain trying to remember all this information when the whole time you're not enjoying it. This is not how you like to study. It's not productive. And you're just kind of annoyed the whole time that you're studying. I try to make things study-wise have at least resistance as possible. That way it was something that I was more likely to do. And then 3, this might kind of come as a surprise, but one of the things that I kind of told myself early on was I'm okay with letting certain things go. And you'll kind of see what I mean a little bit more later. And then 4 was to keep stress levels as low as possible all the time. So let me get into didactic year first, and you'll kind of have a better idea of what I'm trying to say. What I did for didactic year is going back to the start everything early. I would make sure I was looking at lecture slides at least the night before. If they had come out even earlier than that, I would be looking at them basically as when they came out. So this kind of differs from professor to professor, from school to school. Some professors put all their slides up, like first day of class, everything was ready. Other ones, you would have to wait until sometimes the day of, like you had no idea what you were going to be learning about that day. So what I would do is I would email every professor, like let's say a certain class was coming up, I would be emailing them the day before and being like, can you please upload the slides? And this was a huge help, because what I would do is, even if it was just the night before, that would give me a few hours to at least look at it either that night or the next morning. And I would start making an individualized study guide based off those slides. So you'll probably hear this in PA school where people recommend you have at least 3 passes of any information to really have a good handle on it. So this, by going over it even before you ever talk about any of this material in class, is basically already your first pass over. And then I have a completely separate video on how I made the study guides based off of slides or other types of materials. So I'll link that down below, but that's a whole other thing. So I would make the study guides, I would have that study guide, I would have already looked through the material once already, and then we would have lecture. So during lecture, it was a lot less stressful because this was all material that I'd at least looked over and was familiar with. So I wasn't like going in blind and being like, oh, this is the first time I'd seen any of this, which was very helpful. And then 2, I already had my guide made. So if there was something that wasn't in the slides that the professor specifically brought up, or they were like, oh, this part's extra important, this will definitely show up on the exam, I could just go in my study guide, either add it in, highlight it, whatever I needed to do. But it wasn't like I was trying to like take notes at the same time, pay attention at the same time, and like it's too much. I feel like I don't function that way, and I kind of created a system where I didn't have to function that way. And then also I feel like this is a very good use of your class time as well, because then if there was something that didn't make sense, you can use this time to ask instead of being like, oh, I just thought of this like after class, like why is this the case? And then you have to either go email your professor, go find them the next day, like you can't get an immediate answer. So that's kind of what I did. And then basically that class time would be essentially my second pass of the material. So we're already at 2. Class just finished. You saw the material, you're already 2 out of 3 passes of the material. So that's pretty good. And then what I would do is any last minute details, obviously, kind of take another day or so to kind of finalize that study guide. And then once that study guide was done, like that was basically it. That was the main resource because it has everything from the slides that you would need to know for that specific module, topic, whatever it was. And then if something did come up later, you wouldn't have to look at the slides again. And a lot of times these slide sets are tens, hundreds of slides long. I know for like neurology, it was like several hundred slides. And I'm like, realistically, you are not looking through that over and over again. Or if you are, that's a very inefficient way of doing things. So I would know everything I needed to know was on this guide. So I would not look at the slides again, except for like very, very strange instances, but usually not. And then if something did come up later, like let's say I was like watching a video or listening to like a podcast or saw something on a textbook or just something came up, I could always add that just directly into the study guide and it would just all be there. And this was super helpful because it's like, you only have to look at this one thing. There's no like extraneous this and that. Everything's just kind of focused around this one source of information, and then everything else is kind of secondary, and like you can either add it in, you can either not know it. It's a little bit less important. And then let's say the study guide was, I'll just say like 12 pages long. I think that was like the average length for my clinical year study guides for clinical medicine exams. And then I know for me personally, just going off of seeing how I studied every day, because you do have to study pretty much every day. For me, I knew I could get through 4 pages completely, not have any questions remaining, like have a solid grasp on the material and basically like not really have to look at it again. 4 pages was my limit. It might be different for you. It could be less, it could be more, but I knew 4 pages was for me. So let's say it was a standard like 12-page study guide. I do 4 pages every day in like one chunk, and that was about as much as I can remember or that I wanted to. So for a 12-pager, that would be 3 different study sessions. So what I would do is, this is where the kind of like planning or like whatever calendar planner thing that you use works. So I knew like, let's say this topic, it was OBGYN, it would take me 3 study sessions. So I would write in the calendar, okay, study for this class, part 1 of 3, and then study for this class on the next day, part 2 of 3, and then I would write part 3 of 3 on the last day. And then what I would do is, because obviously things come up all the time, a class is harder than you expected, something goes late, you have a personal thing, whatever the case might be, things always come up. So I wanted to kind of factor that into my study schedule too. And again, trying to keep as low stress as possible because PA school can get stressful very, very quickly. I would factor in 2 like buffer days, basically. So let's say the exam was on Friday, I would give myself 2 buffer days, so that'd be Thursday and Wednesday. So then that means for those, if I had to study for 3 sessions, 3 separate days, I'd be starting studying on Sunday. So that way, if something did come up later or I had to like push one of those days back, I have the room to do so and I'm not stressed about it in case something does come up. That is also something that I recommend doing. And then another layer on top of that is you'll be having the material for multiple classes thrown at you at the same time. Like you'll be doing anatomy, you'll be doing clinical medicine, you'll be doing pharmacology, and it's all happening at the same time. So it's not just like you have one class going on at once and then you're done and then you just move on to the next topic. It's multiple at the same time. So this is like the next layer to my studying. I knew that for me personally, I could only do kind of like 3 separate types of work in one day, and that was it. Like, I would not have the bandwidth for anything extra. I did not want to do anything extra. So I kind of created my schedule around that. So in terms of like 3 things for a day, what does that mean? Let's say one could be like studying, just pure studying for one test, one class, just that one thing. Second thing could be making my study guide for a different class. So that would be an entirely like separate like activity. And then the third thing would be maybe like practicing for like PD lab, or maybe like I had to make a study guide for that one too. That would, but it's a different class. That would count as a completely separate like thing to do. But regardless of what it was, I would only put 3 things on my schedule for any given day. So that kind of goes into the whole like calendar planner thing. I'll have like 3 slots. And then one of them could be like, oh, studying for OBGYN, part 1 of 3. And then on there, I could also be like, start a pharmacology study guide. And then I could have on top of that, study for other pharm exam that's coming up. So it would be 3 for a day. And then that way also you have like a visual of what your days are gonna look like. You can literally see when everything will get done. So there's none of that stress. And then again, with however you order it, like you can kind of move things around a bit depending on how things come up. And I feel like that's just the easiest way, like 3 things a day. And then for study guides, just like chop them up into how much you know you can get done. And then always make sure for everything to give yourself like 1 or 2 days of buffer. So that's how I made my schedule. Then going to your third pass is actually like sitting down and like re-looking at your study guide. I have a completely separate video talking about how to use the study guides. I actually do have all of my study guides on my page if you're interested in purchasing. I'll link that below as well. If you don't want to make your own, that's totally fine. I get it. I've already made all of mine from PA school. They've been edited down multiple times throughout the entire 2.5 years. So there's also that option if you don't want to make your own. But basically when you're looking over that study guide and doing your final studying, that is your third pass. And obviously if you need more, if you need to look at it a little bit more, like 2 more times, 3 more times, you can do that as well. But I'm just saying within prepping ahead of class, and then studying, you've got your 3 passes and you should be pretty good to go for the exam. So this is also kind of going back to in the beginning when I talked about front loading your work. I know it kind of seems like, oh, like you have to be on top of things all the time, which you do, but I think you also have to view PA school as like a marathon, not a sprint. You have a certain amount of work that you have to do in PA school to basically graduate, right? So whether you do it earlier or later shouldn't really matter. And if you're actually looking at the cumulative amount of work that you're doing, if you start earlier, you're usually doing less in the long run. And what I mean by that is if you start earlier, you're basically utilizing class time and your later studying time more effectively because you already know the information. So you're not just like, oh, class time is the first time I'm learning this and I still don't really get a handle of it. And then I go home and look at it and it's a little bit more familiar, but like it kind of stacks up later. Whereas if you started early, you probably don't have to look at the material that many times over. And then something else that I recommend doing that I would do a lot is even if it was like 30 minutes, I try to schedule like 30 minutes to an hour, especially if we were having a later start that day in class. I would look at material in the morning. So that would be like a whole chunk. Like in the morning, it could be like, oh, I'm studying for like part 2 of 3 of OBGYN. Or I would be like, I'm starting my study guide for this class that we're gonna have later in the day today. Morning memory is like kind of a secret weapon. You're very fresh in the morning. You're like ready to do work. You have a blank slate. You're not constantly bombarded by the activities of the day and like you're not, hopefully you're not tired. So your memory, I feel like, is honestly 3 times better than if you were to look at that material later in the day, like after you've had all your lectures. So that's also something I really recommend doing. If you can get yourself to do it, I promise you it's worth it. There's times when I've been sitting in exams and I'm like, oh my God, I literally remember this because I remember looking at it like first thing in the morning. I was like sitting at my desk making my study guide on this and I still remember it. So if there's anything that is very hard to memorize, honestly, look over it first thing in the morning. And that's kind of an extra tip that I have. So that's talking about like front loading the work. It sounds like a lot of work, but when you actually look in the grand scheme of things, you're doing a lot less work later. And then also when you use the whole like study guide method, if you ever have to pull something up, it's so quick. You know everything is on there. You could probably even like remember kind of what page it's on or like what the page looked like. You just have to pull it up, Control F, and it's there. Versus, oh, where in the hundreds of slides was that little bit of information? Like sometimes Control F doesn't work, especially if it's like a PDF or something. Or you're like, oh, what was that thing on that video that I watched online? And you're like, I don't even remember what video it was in. If I found the video, I don't know which like minute, like time marker it was at. So this is also saving you a lot of time later on, because it's not just like, oh, you learn hemonc once or something, you'll never have to come like look at it again. It's not the case. You have to look at things multiple times. Things that come up in didactic year reappear in clinical year, reappear when you're taking your PAC-RAT, all the exams. So that way it's very, very, very easy for you to reference things, and you're not just kind of like scrambling all over the place. Like, what was that thing? What was that thing? Is this right? Is Google right? Like that sort of hectic way of looking for information. Last thing I wanted to mention about using the study guides too is it's very efficient in the sense that you know that, oh, I'm only looking at 4 pages this day, like today. So you kind of also have like a mental idea of when you're stopping, which is honestly very helpful, because I know a lot of people just like, oh, I'm just gonna study and how far I get is how far I get. But I feel like if you know when you're actually stopping, it's actually good, because you're like, oh, I'll be done. Like there's an actual definitive finish point. I know a few times when I went over to friends' houses to study, I would just look at my 4 pages and like put it away. I'm gonna eat dinner, I'm gonna watch whatever show I was watching at that time, and I'm just done for the day. I feel like it was kind of a strange thing to be like, oh, you're not going to keep going. And I'm like, no, because I know when everything is going to get done, and this is all I planned for today, and I'm going to take the rest of this day to relax. So that's also another benefit to keep in mind. Now that I've finished with didactic year, I'm going to jump on into clinical year. So this is your clinical rotations, your EOR exams, just that whole year. This is almost the same, I would say, as first year. Obviously, you're not sitting in class having lectures, so it's a little bit different, but same principles. What I would do is, again, study guide, strategy all the way. Except this time I would look at the PAEA topic lists and blueprints, mainly the topic lists. And on there is a complete breakdown of all the big categories and like all the conditions and diseases you have to know for the exam. And then you can also see kind of like percentage wise, cardiovascular is going to be the highest percentage, whereas I don't know, ophthalmology is like a very, very small percentage. So you can kind of have an idea. So I would make my study guides based off of the topic lists. And this is also where I get into the whole part about having very good study guides during clinical year is very helpful, or didactic year is very helpful for clinical year, just because everything's already there. You've probably learned like 90 to 95% of like what you'll need to know for the standardized exams, like your EORs and everything. So I would literally just like move chunks from those study guides that I had from didactic year onto my EOR exam study guides. And it's so fast, like you don't have to redo anything. It's all the same information. Again, if some new information came up that you saw like on a video, like while doing practice questions, any of that, you could just easily add it in. So those would usually not take me like a crazy amount of time. Certain ones would if it was like, I want to say emergency medicine, family medicine, because those kind of pull from like a lot of different specialties. So those might take a little bit longer, but things like psych, women's health, those sort of focused specialty EORs like would literally honestly be really fast to make like the study guides for. So I would start with that, and then I would put high yield on the top, low yield on the bottom, just so I would kind of like mentally know like, oh, this is the bulk of it, this is maybe less important. You can kind of study accordingly. And then this was kind of specific for me. I know each PA program is a little different. Like some rotations are like 4 weeks long, some are like 6 weeks long, they might be longer. Ours were 4.5, and then at the end we would take our exam. So in my mind, I like to cut down on the time just in case I need extra time for anything. Those last few days, like I could kind of allocate how I need to. So in my mind, I'd be like, I have 4 weeks for this rotation, and I would just break down what has to be done by the end of each of those 4 weeks. So for the first week would always be make the study guide, obviously most important. And then I'll get into a little bit more about like the specific supplementary materials that I use, but Smarty Pants was one of them. It's a very good like broad kind of general like brushing up, making sure you kind of know like the big topics. I would look through Smarty Pants in that first week as just like a very good review. And then if there was something in there that for whatever reason wasn't in my study guides, I would go and add that in. So this whole process is basically just like making sure that study guide is the most finalized, tailored thing possible. And then our program required us to write 2 notes for every single rotation, so like patient encounters. So I would make sure to get ideally both of those done the first week, so I didn't have to think about them. But I would say at least 1 note the first week and then 1 note the second week. So that was week number 1. Getting into week number 2, that week would be writing the second patient note if I had not already. And then our program also gave us a year-long access to Blueprint, which was formerly known as Roche, which is basically like a giant Q bank. And then there were also 2 full-length practice exams in there that we were required to do for a grade before the end of the rotation. So I would do one of them that second week, so which is basically like the halfway point point of rotation, just to get an idea. And then also anything that I got wrong on there, straight into the study guide. So all my notes would be done at this point. One out of the 2 exams will be done at this point. The study guide should be more or less done at this point. The majority, obviously, like I'll still be adding in details in. And then week 3 was literally just learn the study guide, completely go through it. I'd be like, okay, I have this many days, and then like 7 days to divide the study guide into 7 sections to study. And that was it. That whole week, just study guide, study guide, study guide. This is the bulk of the kind of memorization learning part. And then that 4th week, which in my mind I considered as the last week, obviously any final like studying, but the bulk of it should have been done that 3rd week. This is when I would also take the last blueprint exam, because this is like basically the end of it and I should be getting a pretty good score on that. And then again, anything I got wrong, all that information goes straight into the study guide. And then that last like 3 days right before the exam would just be like any final, was this not finished? Was there a topic I wanted to look at one more time? Something like that. So that's kind of how I structured it. Obviously, lengths of rotations are kind of different for everyone, and like the schedule definitely, depending on if you're in surgery or if you're in maybe psych, very different clinical, healthcare environments. And obviously one has probably more free time than the other, so you kind of have to plan for those factors too. But either way, I'm like, these are the things that are due every single rotation, and I would do the 4 weeks. This is when they're all gonna get finished, so there's a lot less stress surrounding like, oh, am I gonna finish this? Am I gonna have to turn this in and like not have enough time and it might be subpar? Like there was none of that kind of panic. Something else that I wanted to mention, I feel like this was more pertinent for clinical year, more so than didactic, although it applies to both. I truly believe that there is such a thing as too much information. Time, you will find out pretty quickly, is your most important resource in PA school. You're very limited on it and there's tons of information. So I think you really, really, really just need to like limit yourself to maybe like 3 supplementary sources, whatever that looks like for you. I know for me, I use Smarty Pants, just kind of overview, Rosh or Blueprint because that was given by our school and I thought it was very, very accurate. And then Hippo because they had practice exams for each of the EORs. I didn't think they were as accurate as the Blueprint ones, but I think they were still very, very helpful in terms of just like doing more practice problems. And then also that was free if you had AAPA membership, which was required for my PA program. So I had it already. I already had free access. So like, why not use it? So those were my 3. I know a lot of people use Hippo. A lot of people use Pants Prep Pearls. Just whatever you like, just pick your 3 and stick with them. I think when you get to too many, it's like, oh, I didn't get to fully look through this yet. And it just creates like this panic, like I didn't finish studying yet, kind of stressed out state. And the information doesn't change really. Like it's the same conditions, it's the same everything. Just kind of make sure the 3 like cover different categories. I kind of like the Q bank and then the practice exams and then kind of like the information overview. So it kind of covered everything. But other than that, you shouldn't need more than I think 3 supplementary sources. I know there's a lot of free study guides going around that are hundreds and hundreds of pages, which I think is kind of insane. I don't know if you could even like get through that whole thing like once during a rotation in just those like 4 weeks or so versus like multiple times, which you kind of need to really like learn material. So I think there's definitely such a thing as too much information, and just really try to keep it concise to a few good external outside sources and just leave it at that. And this kind of goes back to like what I was talking about in the beginning of this video, where I kind of told myself I'm okay with not looking at certain things. And this is like one of those cases. It can be counterproductive very, very quickly. And there were also just like certain topics that you would look at these other study guides and you would just see like fatigue, malaise, like doesn't feel well for like every single thing. And it's like, well, obviously, I feel like I'm just like wasting my time sitting here reading this. Like 1, it's common sense. 2, like this isn't very helpful for studying. 3, you're like wasting brain power on reading the same thing over and over for every condition. So there were certain things where I was just like, this is not worth my time to know. If it does show up for whatever reason, I'm okay with getting it wrong because it's such a small part. And then there were certain times in like didactic year when this was the case too. We had a, like medical terminology quiz, very like intro, like overview things that we all had healthcare experience going in. And these should be pretty common sense. Obviously I get it. It's like, oh, these are the first like 2 exams of the year. We want to do well on them, that sort of thing. But I'm like, we have other classes going on too. Like the other classes are infinitely harder than these. A lot of people were spending like hours studying for these. And I was like, I feel like that was kind of insane. Like it was just kind of a poor allocation of brain power and like resources. And I just literally told myself, I think I even told this to someone else too, I was like, if I can't get like a decent enough score on these, PA school just wasn't meant to be. I don't think there was ever like any time where I was like, oh shoot, like I should have probably known that. Like I don't think those times ever came up. So again, time is your most precious resource. Even if you don't get those like tiny little things, you're probably fine. And then kind of going on that philosophy a little bit more, you kind of have to decide for yourself early on, aim for whatever grade that you're looking for, and then do just enough work to most likely get you that grade. And then everything else is just kind of, if you get to it, you get to it. If you don't, it's not a big deal. I think our cutoff was like 93 or something for an A. So in my mind, I was like, oh, 94, because all our exams were like 2-pointer ones. So it could only go like 98, 96, 94. So it'd be like, oh, I need to get a 94 on this. And then I would just study enough to get that grade. And then everything else, I'd be like, I'm not spending another like 3 hours even looking at this if I know I've studied enough to get that grade. And I know that's a little like, oh, well, you don't know, or like some exams are harder, but like after you've taken that many, you kind of have an idea. So just kind of keep that in mind too. I think that's also very helpful. At a certain point, are these extra 3 hours, 5 hours, like studying these like random little things really worth it? Like this is maybe going to be like one question. Going into just a few last minute tips that kind of span all of PA school and also kind of will be helpful when you actually have to study for the PANs. One kind of I touched on, it goes with the whole like study early, front loading kind of thing, is study the hard things first. I know it kind of can be a little bit like, oh, I just want to start with something easy, like kind of get into the swing of things and like then tackle the hard stuff. But again, going back to the philosophies, like work with your brain, not against it. You'll start to build up resistance very, very soon because your brain's the freshest earlier on. So tackle the hard stuff first, because as you keep studying, even if it's easy stuff, you'll just be like, oh, I've been sitting here for so long. Like, I don't want to keep looking at this. Like, you just get tired and you don't want to be hitting that like resistance later and then being like, oh, I have a harder topic to look at. You're just like, oh, like this sucks. If you start with the hard things, you might be a little like, for 30 seconds, but then like once you're actually looking at it, I feel like you just kind of forget that you're studying. And then you'll kind of hit that, oh, I'm getting tired, but everything else is like easy. So you'll probably just continue, like you won't feel annoyed that you still have to keep looking at stuff. So I definitely recommend doing the hard things first. And then also that way you remember it better and you'll have to look at it less. Again, do the things that require the most memorization type things or effort in the morning. I found that really helps. Kind of similarly, don't skip the physio, like the physiology behind different conditions. I know it feels like it takes up a lot of time and sometimes you're like, oh, this like doesn't really show up on like standardized exams either, or it'll show up in like kind of a more subtle way. Really understanding the physiology like early on makes everything so much easier later, because it's like even if you don't know something, you're like, oh, but this causes this, so this is probably what happens. You can just kind of figure it out on your own. And I feel like you also build a lot of confidence with that, just because I know even if this came up, I can kind of figure it out, is very helpful on exams and makes them a lot less stressful. You just kind of instinctively know. And then whenever these questions come up, you're not just like pulling from a list of like, what did that say? Like trying to pull from your memory. You understand it and it's like very easy to apply. And then that way you also don't have to keep going back and looking at these charts and just being like, this mnemonic, what did this letter stand for again? You won't have to keep looking at that. You'll just know. So I definitely say don't skip the physio. It can feel like a lot more work up front, but it will save you hours and hours and hours of time of studying later. Like truly, I definitely recommend not skipping the physiology part. And then, oh, another thing, I feel like this all goes to like study early. The natural thing for us to do, especially if we were like last minute people in like college, is to base studying off of when exam dates are and not when the material comes out. Obviously keep in mind the test date, but I feel like a lot of people are like, the test is on Friday, so I'll look at it 2 days before, which sounds fine and honestly doable if it was just one class. But a lot of times in PA school, you have like, oh, Wednesday's a test, Thursday's a test, Friday's a test, or sometimes you'll be like 3 tests back to back on Friday. And that's just how it is. And then once you actually see all that work all together, it's very unmanageable. What you thought was like, oh, it would be easy, but you're doing that for 3 different classes and you kind of have to keep them like separated in your head. It's very, very hard. So I definitely say you should start your study process based on when the material is out, not when the actual test date is. So that way, you know, you've pretty much got, let's just say like 85% of what you have to know. And then once it comes closer to test date and you do studying for this class, part 1 of 3, part 2 of 3, part 3 of 3, those are kind of like your final finishing touches. And then once you're done, you know you're just done. And you're one of those people that's like, oh, but like if there's too many days between the exam and when I finish studying, like I might forget some stuff. That's not a problem. Something I would do is make a half page or 1 pager of very last minute things that were either just memorization, like you just had to memorize it, or last minute things. It's like, oh, you got this question wrong like twice. Just make sure you remember this tiny little detail. Just a quick like, last minute things to know. I make one of those for a lot of exams if there were like 2 days between when I finished studying and when the actual test is, just so I can kind of brush up on those last few things. I felt like that worked out perfectly well. That's also another tip if you're kind of worried like, oh, I'm gonna forget something, don't worry about it. Honestly, I think that's about it. I think just the bigger picture, factoring in stress levels, like keeping them low as possible at all possible times, because stress can build up really quickly during PA school. And then once it gets to a certain point, it's very hard to be like, let me reset, because you don't have time to reset. It's just like next exam, next class, 4 lectures in a day. It just keeps going. So you really don't want to fall behind. You want to stay on top of things and you want to use your time the best way you can. So a huge part of how I feel like I was very successful in PA school was just like stress management, because having like the set process and knowing that things are done early, I know exactly when everything is getting done. So there was no worry about any of that stuff. Oh, am I going to finish studying? Did I study enough times? Did I miss something? Like everything was accounted for. And I feel like that made PA school pretty, I don't want to say like low stress, but honestly it kind of was lower stress. This whole process can seem like a lot of work you have to put into it, but you have to think of it this way. It's better to kind of put this work early on versus spending hours and hours and hours later kind of making up for it. I think also you have things set up this way, you kind of leave as much free time as possible for yourself in the future because you've already done everything early. So I feel like it's always better to kind of have that free time later and be like, do I want to go to the gym? Do I want to go out and eat? Do I want to go spend time with friends? Do I want to work on something else? Do I want to just stay home and rot? It's great to have those options later because you've opened up that free time kind of later on, like when you're getting closer to exam time, versus, oh, I'm just going to kind of passively study, no real strategy, and then just really study hard for it like right before the exam, and then you don't have that free time. So I guess this kind of ties into a little bit about how I had so much time to do everything else. Obviously, it kind of depended on what part of PA school I was in. Like certain rotations were definitely more stressful than others. It took a lot more time. But overall, I would definitely have at least some leftover time when it came like closer to like the end of rotations. And then that's when I would be like, I have time to work on this thing that I'm doing with like APA or this thing that I'm doing with NISPA. Now I have time to put together an article and upload on HowMedWorks. That's how I had the extra time. And then just a little bit about HowMedWorks. It is a healthcare advocacy platform for patients and for kind of PA students, pre-PAs, PAs that I've kind of created over the years to help people understand health insurance, healthcare system, like finding providers, understanding the PA profession, how to get into PA school, tips for PA students, things like that. And I do have an entire section completely dedicated to my study guides, one entire one on the clinical medicine ones from didactic year, and then all my EOR ones for clinical year. So if you want to save even more time and you don't want to make your own study guide, that's totally cool. I have all of mine if you want to take a look at those. I've spent the entirety of PA school constantly editing them. If anything new came up that I saw anywhere from any source that was fact-checked and accurate, it would go into those study guides. So if you don't want to do the work, those are an option. Link below. And that is it. Oh, and one more thing, I guess, on the study guide thing. I kind of have been making study guides for all my classes since honestly high school, but I really started doing it in college and a lot of my peers would use them. I continued this method into PA school, and at first I created the study guides honestly just for me because I can't study off of slides, I can't study off of a text, like I just can't. So it was mostly for me, and then I started sharing them with my classmates and everybody really liked them. And then I was like, this is something that's like very helpful. There's always like that one person in the class that supplies a lot of the study guides. I feel like I was that person. Then I was like, oh, this would be great to add to HowMedWorks. And then I would start sharing them with people I knew from other PA programs. They found them super helpful. And now people all over the country are buying them, which is kind of insane, in Canada too. But these were honestly how I not just like made it through PA school, but how I did very well in PA school. So feel free to take a look as well. If they're helpful for you, that would be awesome. And that's it. So I hope you found this very long video helpful, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.